Okay, this is the conclusion part, which should be relatively short. So we've discussed the grand challenges and nice set of recommendations that included all the items going from uh, anatomy of, did I miss here? Yeah, these are the strategic recommendations, and they had subsections like infrastructure, support and resources, project teams, funding, stages and project evaluation, deliverable types and intellectual properties, success, and of course diversity and equity. Let me make sure that I didn't miss the headline on the first section. La la la, doing it in real time, but that's okay. 7 point. Uh, yeah, so yeah, I did miss it. So let me put it in real time here. So this is the first one is about the problem choice. So it should actually go here. Okay, I screw up things sometimes, sorry about that. And so I read the details of the recommendations here. So the first one under anatomy of a grand challenge is of course problem choice. Among high impact problems, which ones are well suited to be enabled by a grand challenge as opposed to other funding instruments? So the anatomy of a grand challenge here is of course that you have all these steps you have to follow. So grand challenge design, for example, has to have a modality, phases, stages, submission types, expert advisory group, advisory board and judging panel, monetary incentives, non-monetary incentives, and outcomes with a lot of supporting aspects. So the other sections then follow, but here the problem choice recommendations we read off as frame grand challenge goals based on readiness level, ensure AI is indeed well suited for the problem, prioritize areas with existing interests from complementary stakeholder communities, deprioritize areas with disproportionately high funding and media attention, and do not attempt to cover all areas equally. I'm rereading them because I missed this key part here before. Okay, doesn't matter. Let's come back to conclusions. This report explores the role of grand challenges in the space of AI for climate and nature. Through a detailed analysis of more than 200 grand challenges and open innovation initiatives, we identify successes, pitfalls, leverage points, and value propositions associated with the past initiatives and offer key recommendations for improving the design, implementation, and impact of future grand challenges in this space. Grand challenges offer a unique mechanism for mobilizing significant resources around ambitious goals and for catalyzing systemic challenge beyond immediate solutions. Examples given here, by creating market incentives and shaping policy frameworks. So typically when you have government agency funding or corporate funding in India, you have things like corporate social responsibility fundings. They all come with a limited scope and often limited amounts. But if something like Bezos Earth Fund or Schmidt's Future is set up to invite grand challenge teams built across the globe and proposing something that just will not happen with the other kinds of fundings, then the success of this proposal, if funded, has to be nearly guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed in life, but you build a team, you define a problem, and you define all the steps that we talked about here in a way that failure should be basically close to zero, okay, of all the items we listed. So the success of a grand challenge importantly depends on careful problem selection, definition of a theory of change covering both direct outcomes and systemic impacts, and the thoughtful deployment of resources and support structures in alignment with this theory of change. right? So let's go back and read the theory of change for one of them. So initiative and planning, the theory of change is going to basically address what is the theory of change of the climate of the challenge with respect to driving broader systemic impacts. So we looked at this here. For example, under policy governance policy, under policy we considered governance, policy influencer, and knowledge disseminator. Theory of change here is defined as, or chosen as, shape public policy and governance via actionable insights. So the words are critical: actionable insight as opposed to just academic papers. Okay, so in climate we say usable climate science, which, according to some arguments, must help adaptation because mitigation is already going on. And if you look at Nexus Network, ecosystem creator and incubator for its theory of change, create robust platforms for coordination and capacity building. Okay, so you get the idea that you are covering that aspect in terms of a deliverable. That's very critical. Okay. We emphasize the importance of placing climate and nature goals at the center of challenge design, as well as execution and evaluation, which critically includes consideration of deployability, long-term sustainability, ethics, equity, and community impact. As soon as you say nature and climate and you are going to do something about it, it includes intervention in people's lives, even if the intention of the intervention is to help them. Co-developing with them is very critical, and making sure that the solutions that you are giving them or developing with them, co-developing with them, are actually sustainable but also ethical, equitable, and have community impact as intended, and unintended consequences are either minimal or they are well mapped so that you know how to deal with them. And it's always a flexible plan, so you can make the system respond to unintended consequences as well. Drawing on learnings from past initiatives, we provide strategic recommendations that are intended to guide stakeholders in creating more effective and impactful grand challenges. So it's not just about solving grand challenges or attacking grand challenges, it is how to design very well a grand challenge in AI for applications to climate and nature. In particular, we provide concrete guidance on choosing problem areas that are likely to benefit from a grand challenge, on combining monetary support with non-monetary resources such as mentorship, computing infrastructure, and post-challenge support to improve solutions' impact and sustainability, and on parameters such as funding, phases, team selection and composition, deliverable type, and evaluation criteria. Okay. We particularly note that successful applications in the AI for climate and nature space involve a heterogeneous set of actors from a wide variety of sectors, contexts, and geographies, underscoring the importance of centering diversity, equity, and inclusion when shaping challenges, goals, and supporting participation. So typically you are looking at climate impacts on food, agriculture, water, energy, health, buildings, infrastructure, and of course all of them in community levels, sometimes neighborhood levels. And then there is this big framework of grand challenge under which you are co-developing solutions with global scope in whatever way it means, in the sense you develop a solution here, but let's say rural resilience, but it is transferable with region-specific details of climate change, climate impacts, culture, socioeconomics, geopolitics, funding, finance, everything else. Okay. So finally, we hope that the insights and strategies outlined in this report help funders, organizers, and other stakeholders create more effective and inclusive grand challenges that drive meaningful progress on some of the most pressing issues of our time. So this is intended for these audience, funders, organizers, and other stakeholders. However, many important questions remain on which we strongly encourage further work. These include: which specific AI for climate/nature problem areas should be prioritized in future grand challenges? We have started, we got good examples, good implementations, we can see how they are working, and then we have to think in the future how to modify these priorities, or how to prioritize instead of just starting applying AI without these phenologies of grand challenges, or anatomies of grand challenges. What metrics and frameworks should be used to assess the long-term environmental and societal impacts of solutions developed through grand challenges? What are the socio-technical barriers to the adoption of grand challenge outputs, whether they are potential outputs and are already realized in different regions and sectors, and how can these barriers be overcome? So it may be easier to apply it for managing water or agriculture, but if you are trying to be equitable, just, and so on, then it may require much more work in terms of crossing the socio-technical barriers, right? We encourage further research by the community on these important questions. Okay, so it's a nice report, rather pedagogical in terms of the details, but very practical in terms of designing grand challenge initiatives in applying AI for climate and nature, with all the requirements of equity, diversity, inclusiveness, and so on, as well as solving key pressing problems along the way. Okay, so let's leave it here. The advantage is defining these properly and having it prepared then can make it easier to look for funding. If funding call comes and you run around trying to build a team, then you are typically rushed, and then if the project doesn't get funded, then the team falls apart. So next time you rebuild. Whereas if you define or identify a grand challenge and go through all these steps and have it ready with the team and the stakeholders, then the seeking funding is easier, and if funding becomes available, implementing it easier. So the Schmidt Futures, just to mention by name, invites these grand challenges in different sectors, and we submitted one with the Americans, Europeans, Indians, and it didn't get funded. What is the use of the effort you put in? How to keep that team together? Or do you just abandon the great work you did in terms of identifying a grand challenge? Right? So these are tricky issues. It's not just about learning about grand challenges and coming up with a grand challenge. It's about sustaining the team itself, even when the funding has not come yet. Okay? See you in the next podcast. It's the third report from the Bezos Earth Fund. Okay?